Hello everybody and welcome to the channel. I'm joined today by Brian from Anarchy Models, and we're going to be taking a look at some new stencils and some interesting ways of applying them as well, using a variety of techniques, so not always airbrushing.
Yeah, we've always said that the airbrush is best for using stencils and any masking really, but people are always asking, can we do it with a paintbrush? Well, the answer actually is yes, for some of the stencils you can. So we're going to show that today. It works better for the more organic stencils, which we'll show in other videos, but for this one, we're going to show you can use it for the more geometric ones too. So if you haven't got an airbrush, you can still get involved with the stencils. Happy days.
And the first batch of stencils we're going to be looking at today are hexagonal themed.
Yeah, the hexagon stencils have always been quite popular. So we're going to do some new ones here today that are a bit different than what we've already done. So this is one of the new ones here. We can see it's a bit trippy if you look at it.
It strobes delightfully.
It sort of swirls with a life of its own. I'm going to call this one Hexnotic. So we'll be showing this today. And then also we've got one here, which is still a prototype. I'm going to change this a little bit. I don't know if the camera picks that up very well or not, but basically you've got a hex grid which is then tumbling away and sort of rotating as they fall. So this one's going to be called Hex Tumble, and there'll be several sizes of that. But again, this one's going to change a bit before we actually release it.
Very cool. All right then. What are we going to be starting with then? Airbrush or other methods?
Well, as we've not shown it before, I thought we'd start with just doing a little bit of the non-airbrush method, to show people that's possible as well.
That's great. So what do we need for that?
Well, for that, you don't want to be using inks or airbrush paints for this. You need a normal model paint, ideally something that's going to go on very quick. So this is just happened to be the first pot of white I grabbed, which is a P3 white. And then this is extra opaque Vallejo. And I chose this because if it's extra opaque, it's going to go on quicker. And it's a thick paint. For this, you actually want a very thick paint. If it's too runny, it's going to get under the stencil from the brush, which is not what you want.
Sure.
So we'll just do a quick little test on this bit of perspex here. And then we'll move on to just do a quick demo on a model. So let's get some paint. And if you're going to do, you need a brush per color that you want to use at one time. So I'm going to use white and I'm going to use a blue. So we'll continue stabbing the brush onto the stencil. You'll make sure the brush is nice and dry and you don't have too much paint on there. If you've washed the brushes, you'll need to make sure they're fully dry before you can do this, or the paint will just run under the stencil. I'll change to the other brush, trying to keep the colours separate. And now we'll continue. I'm going to just try and create a bit of a transition. So I'm just gently stabbing it around most of the blue, and then a bit more in the centre area.
And with the stippling brushes, they've got a very short, firm set of bristles.
They're not super firm. There's so many of them that it just helps support itself. So that'll do for now. So there we've got the hex pattern there. So it's not going to give quite the same effect as the airbrush, but it will work and give you a similar effect.
Which is handy if you don't have access to an airbrush itself then.
Exactly.
What about using something like a sponge?
I've tried using a sponge and it tends to hold too much paint and it wants to get under the stencil. Different sponges may work better, so you can try it by all means. But when I tried it recently, the stippling brush was the way to go. But yeah, try it.
Okay.
The very small detailed stencils, it won't work. One with tiny pinprick holes. But ones such as these, where the holes are quite large, it's fine for doing those. So yeah, you can do it. So if you're going to you probably want to start by base coating your model in the base coat sort of colours. So you maybe not start from black unless you want a dark background, and then just do your stippling on top. Then you can also tint the stippling with inks in a similar way to what we're going to do later in the video. So you could do that on top of your stippling once it was dry.
But it's a handy way for people to access the stencils if they're not already into airbrushing, which is good. Yeah. Where did the stippling brushes come from?
We're going to be doing these exact ones on the website, but you can get them from all sorts of places. Okay. Yeah.
Just make sure that you keep a nice short stippling brush.
Exactly. Yeah. So something like this where it's long and fluffy. This isn't going to work.
Yeah.
And you don't need to buy super expensive brushes. Yeah, short bristles and either plenty of them or quite firm. Otherwise, it just won't get through the stencil nicely.
Okay. So next up, I'm going to try the same stencils then with an airbrush.
Exactly. Yeah. So we'll do that in a minute. So we are back for the airbrush side of things. So to start off with, this is some quick examples of the type of thing we're going to be looking at doing. Some nice vibrant hex patterns here. And we'll go through exactly how these are done.
Okay.
So you wouldn't think so from looking at this, but we're actually going to start with the with white for the first stage of all of these.
Okay.
So the reason for that is getting vibrancy such as this over black is actually very difficult. So we just don't do that. We start with white where we need it. And there's been other videos where I've done the same sort of thing if you need to watch those, but we'll do it a bit of a twist on it today. So we'll get started.
Okay.
We are going to be mainly using Vallejo inks for this session. This is a new, I think it's new to me, Game Ink White.
Yep.
Now, a lot of inks you can use straight from the bottle, but with it being a little bit warmer recently, I am going to use a little bit of thinner and a little bit of flow improver as well. So I always start off with a little bit of thinner straight in the cup. Then I'll add the Game White.
Yeah, this is part of Vallejo's revamped model color range. I think it's less than a year old currently.
Yeah, like I said, I only came across these relatively recently, and I'm really liking them, especially the colours we'll use later. I'm very happy with those. Now I'm going to use a little bit of flow improver. If you can use flow improver, you only use 1 or 2 drops. If you mix this up with the thinner, it just messes up the consistency of the paint. So be careful not to mix them up. Vallejo, if you're listening, these bottles are too similar. So if we can have them different, that'd be great. I know you started doing the cleaner in a different color to the thinner because they were same for a while. So thank you for changing that. But if these are still the same, those could be different as well.
Some sort of massive red warning lid.
Yeah.
On one of them would be good.
Yeah, as I said, for a while the cleaner and the thinner were the same, but thankfully they've seemed to have changed that as well. So once we've got the Game Ink and the thinner and the flow improver in there, I'm going to start off by highlighting everywhere you would highlight, and also I like to have the leading edge a bit brighter as well. And the reason I'm using ink rather than the normal white paint is it helps a bit of more of a transition from the black to the white. That will be shown later as to why we want that. So I'm going to start off with the lightest places and then continually build up till I'm happy with where it is.
Okay.
So light passes and build the colour up. So as we can see, that's quite a light, almost grey looking paint there now, but that's actually the white ink. So we're going to keep building, just keep working it up on different areas. It should be going on, it should be dry almost immediately. If it's looking shiny and wet, you're putting too much paint on. You need to either move somewhere else or just stop entirely until the paint is dry. Don't keep spraying if it's shiny and wet. And also, I'm continually turning the trigger on and off using the finger. You don't keep the paint on the whole time. So you'll end up with extra spots when you change direction if you don't keep turning the paint on and off.
Do you use the airflow to help dry it then when you're not?
Yeah, a lot of the time I'm using just the air, but I'm just continually moving at the minute, so I don't really need to do that. But if I want to focus on this piece here for a while, so now it's just air, paint again, just the air, and so you'll be doing that. But to start with, I'm just moving so quick that it doesn't really matter, because my initial spray is so fine. We're not getting the puddling effect that you can sometimes get. And just for reference, so we can show what I'm doing, the sprays I'm using are kind of this sort of size, so it's still quite a thin spray. If you come on really big like this, it's just going to cover too much. And if as soon as you start to see it being wet and runny like there, that's no good as well. So I'm doing quite thin lines to build up the colour.
So I've no doubt people will ask this, but what airbrush are you using?
This is Harder & Steenbeck. Evolution CR Plus is this one. I'd always recommend getting a good quality airbrush, so like Harder & Steenbeck or Iwata is always my go-to.
I know myself, whenever I started, I got one of the budget airbrush kits, and the only thing that's really stuck with me for any length of time was the compressor that came with it.
Well, you're lucky with that one. My first compressor was the same thing from a cheap kit.
Yeah.
And it burnt itself out within a couple of months and never worked again. Made a burning smell while I was working, seized up. But yeah, unfortunately, the cheap and cheerful kits, they just don't tend to work for very long, and you can't get spares for them. With a lot of things in life, you get what you pay for with the airbrush.
Very much so.
So, and with tools and stuff, the cheapest quality tools are going to break in 2 minutes, and the same with airbrushes. So, I would stick with a quality one, ideally. You could keep going. If you want the model to be more brighter, then you could keep going more than this. This is how I like to get it to. And you can also, if you've done too much somewhere, then you can fix it. I've actually done a little bit of a highlight there off of this thing where I don't want it. So I've got a little bit of black ink in there, and I'm just going to carefully knock that back to get rid of it.
I suppose that's the thing with airbrushing colors on, especially whenever you're starting off with a dark color, you're doing it in such gradual steps that if you do overspray somewhere, you can correct it fairly easily with just ink. You don't have to worry about going right back in with a paint to cover it up.
Yeah, no, I mean the white we've used is still relatively muted because over a black base coat. So very quickly that extra highlight is now gone, and we can carry on with the next stage. Okay. So let's change colours and crack on with that. So on to the next stage. Now, if you do happen to have two airbrushes, we are going to be coming back to the white. So I'll just leave the white in the other airbrush. And if you have sort of, say, one's a better quality than the other, have the white in the good, more quality airbrush, because this stage doesn't really need super precision. We're just going to be using an ink to tint this white.
Okay.
So yeah, if you do happen to have two brushes, I would go for that. So again, I'm going to use a bit of thinner. You don't always need to do that with the inks, but it's been a bit warm lately. 1 or 2 drops of flow improver, and some of the ink. So this is it's relatively new Vallejo turquoise ink, and we're going to use this to tint our white. When you're using the inks, it's going to be purely as a tint. So if I spray it on the back here on this black, it's literally going to do virtually nothing. But where we have white, you're going to get this very vibrant blue that you can build up to quite a strong colour, or just one light pass. So you've got a variation there in just the ink. But where we have this variation on the model, we're going to get a nice transition going on. So I'm going to start off by spraying the darker areas. and then work your way towards the front. I'm going to try and leave the front a bit lighter. So you try and leave that. You do want to go a little bit blue, but as I said, I'll start where the darker areas are. Again, the reason we've gone for a white and then doing this on top is we're getting a really nice, vibrant light colour over black. And it's a lot easier doing it this way than trying to get, build up through multiple layers of blue. Here we can do it all in 2 colours and then maybe shade slightly areas with a darker blue. But there you can see it's starting to come out already.
Yeah, and the transparency of the inks just helps.
Yeah.
You could do it with paints, but you'd have to be very exacting, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. You would have to use multiple blues, and yeah, you'd have to be more exact with it. Again, with this, you can do the touch-ups with the black ink to reshade areas if it's too much white. I really like playing with the transparency that the airbrush can give you. It's one of the big benefits is you can layer the same color multiple times.
Yeah, and every time it increases the saturation.
Exactly, yeah. So that's what I'd probably say is like a one coat over all of it. As you can see, the blue over here is a bit more stronger. That's why I did a little bit more than the rest of the model. So you could just leave it there. I'm going to keep going. Well, obviously, you could do this of any colours. But yeah, we'll build the colour up a bit further than this, and it'll just have much more vibrancy and interest going on. Again, I'm mainly trying to concentrate where it's already a bit darker, and I'm going to leave the very front edge if I can until last. I'm constantly changing where I am on the model so that I'm not letting it build up too quickly and make the paint run. It should be dry almost immediately. If it's shiny and wet, you're putting too much paint on and you either stop or just go somewhere else on the model. So constantly paint on and off, sometimes using the air to dry it. So that is the first stage done. Now you'll make sure this is thoroughly dry. I would ideally let it fully dry and then give it a coat of varnish as well, as the stencil can sometimes scratch the paint. So yeah, fully dry, varnish ideally, and then move on to the stenciling.
When it comes to varnishing, obviously there's 3 types. You've got your matte, satin and glosses. Does it make a difference? Or are you just looking to have a protective layer?
At this stage, it's just a protective layer.
Okay.
On this sort of thing, a gloss varnish can make it look really good when you're done. So you may want to try that. But this is just a protection. If it's fully dry, then it may be it's not necessary to varnish.
Okay.
But if you can, you've got the time to take that extra time, then I would do it. But I know this one that I did the other day. This one wasn't varnished because I didn't have the time to do it. So, but I would if you can, particularly the inks. We're spraying a very thin layer of paint, so it is more delicate. So yeah, it's worth spending the extra time if you can.
Okay.
And I normally do use a rattle can varnish. You can use the airbrush varnish, but I've just always used the rattle can. And then my other worry is you can't see varnish to clean it.
Yes.
So it's I've just not dabbled with the airbrush varnishes because I'm happy with a spray can. But
sure.
But yeah, so
okay.
So yeah, that's ready for stenciling.
Okay, back and prepped to give some of the tints a go, I suppose.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly show before we do the next stage of tinting on the model, I just wanted to quickly show that you can do it with the stippling technique we showed earlier as well. So I'm just going to quickly get a little bit of the ink on my palette here. And I've just already stippled a section of the hexes onto this wing here. And I've got quite a large soft brush here, and we can just quickly cover the whole area with the ink. And see, it's just going to tint it that nice vibrant colour, and you could layer that to build up the vibrancy again and again. So you're going to get the depth going on in the same sort of way as with the airbrush.
Sure. And when you're applying it with a brush like that, can you speed the drying with?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just use a hairdryer. So quickly we can just. Dry that off. You can see it's barely touched the black, like at all. We have the nice transition there. If I get a bit more ink, we could sort of only do it part the way. And then maybe feather the edge with the brush a little bit.
Yeah.
And then you can maybe dry it again, and you could keep layering it until you are happy.
Yeah, in a similar way to doing the depth with the airbrush.
Yeah. But again, your nice big soft brush, you've got to cover it all very quickly, so that none of it dries before you finish doing the area. And you may want to do like one section, like this whole wing, do all of that, and then move on, because you need to get the ink on, and all of it has to be wet before it starts to dry.
Like that, to prevent tide marks.
You'll get tide marks, like you say, if it starts to dry somewhere and you keep going, or if you keep going while it's drying, you'll rub off parts and it won't work. So you've got to get it all done and then move somewhere else on the model.
Okay.
So let's go back to our project from earlier. So we mentioned earlier that we were going to be using the white again. So what we're going to do is we're now going to do the stenciling part on here, and we're going to use the Hexnotic one, which is this twisty hexness.
Yes. The Twilight Zone meets Stencils.
Exactly. Anyway, I'm going to do what I usually do, which is have the thing fade from the front to the back, because I think that looks cool. But obviously you could do it however way you want. You could have it in reverse. You could try and cover the whole thing as much as you can, whichever way you want to do it. One little tip though before we start is, if possible, you want to think ahead about what's going to cause you issues. Now this big spine here looks cool, but it may cause issues trying to get the stencil in here later. So if you can, just don't glue it on. So this piece actually just slots onto the model quite nicely. So we can then stencil that flat on the board, and get to these recesses here, either side, a lot easier than if this was attached. And this happens to, on this model, just slide on and off. And you don't even have to glue it till you're done. And the same, if you've got complicated models like that and you can leave parts separate, it can be beneficial to do that.
Yeah.
So
working in sub-assemblies.
Exactly. Yeah. So we'll do that for this example as well. So there'll be two sizes of this that come as a set. So I'll use the bigger size on the bigger areas and the smaller size on the smaller areas. So we'll start off by doing the very front area. And we still have the white in there from earlier, the white ink. So with any sort of stenciling where the stencil isn't actually stuck to the model, you need to hold it tight to the model and not move it while you're spraying. So and you want to only try and spray it where it's actually touching the model. So I'm going to aim along this bottom edge here. And I'm building the colour up lightly in a few passes. A lot of the time, this is just the air now drying it. Now it's more paint, back to the air. If you blast the paint on in one go, it's going to get under the stencil and make the paint run. So that's the first bit there. And then you want to leave that alone and move on to somewhere else. So I don't want to risk doing this area while this is still potentially wet. So I'll move on to the bigger size on this bigger area here. Just get that in the camera. So paint on and off the whole time, just building up the colour. That's that area done. Looks really trippy the way it twists like that.
Yeah, the bend in it is particularly distinctive.
Yeah. I'm really pleased with this one. So let's move on to somewhere else. I might as well do the other side now. If you wanted to, you could try and get them to match in the same sort of way, but I don't think we'll worry about that today. So those wings done. I'm just going to quickly show you on this board here. This is what I'm doing with the paint. I'm very lightly layering it on. I'm just doing it in this area here. Very lightly building it up. And that should be dry very, very quickly. It wasn't quite dry there, but you just build it up. If you blast it on like this, it's just going to run and get under the stencil. So you just build it and build to the colour you want. So you can, it starts off with a very sort of light paint and then you're building it up.
How close are you keeping the airbrush needle to the actual
that
model?
Very much depends on the line you want. The closer you are to the model, the finer the line you'll be, which means, again, the closer you are, the less trigger pull. If you want a wider spray, you're going to come back further and more trigger pull. So if I was trying to do this area here, what I've just done, I'd probably be around this sort of distance. If I wanted to follow a line on a much smaller area, I don't know, let's say I was trying to put a line down the middle of this sort of pod area, I may be this close.
Yeah.
So you're constantly changing the distance and the amount of trigger pull at the same time. So we'll just keep going with the stenciling. And you'll let the model dictate where you try and put the stencil. If it's going to be too difficult to put a stencil somewhere, just don't try and put it there. When you look at this model now, it makes you think that the hex pattern's on the whole model, but it's not. So right in here, where you've got this very sharp recess, and up against these spines, it's very tricky to get it in there. So you just don't. It's enough to do parts of it than the whole thing.
It naturally sort of falls with the stencil and the shape that you're getting the majority of your highlights.
Yeah, so
I've got the stencil.
And also I'm only, like when I was spraying here, I probably was only spraying up to the first centimetre of the model. This centre part is all the overspray, and that gives you the nice transition. If there's anywhere you're unhappy with, you could go back and spray black ink and then white ink and then the blue and build it back again.
Give it another go, yeah.
Yeah, that's looking pretty cool there. So you could just leave it there if you wanted to, and that's perfectly nice as it is. What we're going to do a bit later is we're going to do another colour over the top, and it will give an even different technique. So off camera, we in a similar way to the other aircraft we're painting, this was feathered on with the white ink and then the magenta ink in the same way as the blue one earlier. We're going to do a slightly different stencil on this one. So let's do that. So this is the Hex Tumble. Now usually I always, on most videos I've been doing the lightest part at the front. We're actually going to do it the other way around this time. We want the lighter part towards the back of the stencil, and it shows up better that way.
Fading forward.
Exactly. So we want to line up the where the hex pattern starts to tumble away. We want to have that near the start of the model. And you may have to sort of rotate it a few times to get it to where you're happy. So there's quite nice. So again, we're going to feather the white on lightly, but from back to front this time. So there we've got the hex pattern, and the hexes flying away are lighter than the front. And we'll carry on with that on the other side. When you're using the stencils, you want to make sure you're spraying the paint from the same side If you flip it over and then press it to the model, you're likely to get paint off of the stencil onto the model. If you do need to flip the stencil for some reason, make sure you've washed it or fully let it dry before you're using it on the model. So let's line that up in a similar way to the other side. We'll have a few of the solid hexes at the front and then the hex tumble pattern behind, fading away off the model. And we're only trying to spray it where it's actually touching the model. And you just give a very light fade across the whole stencil, and then stronger at the back. So there's that area. If we do it the other way around, you don't see the tumbles very well.
Yeah.
So we're going to do a few more of those.
And I suppose on a bigger kit with a larger panel, you can orientate it the other way if you want and have that that tumble in reverse. Have the few drifting into a solid mass.
You could,
where
you could equally have it, like you say, the other way around. I just prefer it this way, but you could have it so the hexes are all sort of stacking into place. You know, it's up to you, and again, any colours you want to use. This is just what we're playing with today, but use any colours, any orientation. You could have them coming in, stacking in from the sides, or flying away to the sides, or however you want to do it. I'm just going to have them all going the same direction today, but it's entirely up to you guys what you do with yours. So here the stencils are nice and bendy, so I can get it into this dished area. And then I think on the front area, we're going to use a smaller size. I think that will do for now. So again, you could leave that as it is now. You could have done this with a different colour paint on top of the pink. But we're going to come back with an ink later and play with what we've done there. So we're back to our blue plane. And I've already got the magenta ink. One from below. Thank you for eventually making the magenta and the turquoise inks. They're awesome. And we're basically going to be doing the reverse of this. So here we've got the hexes are blue and the base is turquoise, magenta, sorry. So we're going to do in the reverse of this on this one here. And we're mainly going to be trying to paint just where the hexes are. We are going to end up hitting the blue without the hexes a bit, but we're going to try and mainly just hit the hexes initially. So this is the colour we've got in there. Again, we can get the nice sort of light colours and then build up gradually to a much, much stronger colour if we want to. So that's one pass. You can barely see. There we go.
Okay.
And then you've got a much stronger colour if you need to. Again, you could leave this just as it is, or with the blue and then a colour, but we're going to play a bit with colour transitions here. So we're going to get a nice magenta hexes, and where the magenta is going over the blue, we'll actually get a purple. So a bit of colour theory for you there.
Do you ever do multiple transitions? Sort of a rainbow?
You can probably do all sorts of transitions. You know, it just depends on what you want to do and the different colour theories. Like I did some other tests here the other day, with similar sort of techniques. So you can do the blue and the orange, or yellow and blue makes green, so you have the transition of green. Here we've got orange, so we end up with a bit more of a red transition. Here it was magenta and then white and then yellow and then a bit of red and orange here. But again, on this board here, you can see I've got multiple transitions going on. I mean, you could have mixed them in the middle somehow.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can do all sorts of things. So I'm just going to continue on with the magenta ink. As we can see, where I'm not spraying it, we've still got all this nice turquoise going on. It's only where I'm actually aiming, we're getting this transition. As we can see how I'm doing it, the second layer. So this is the first layer, this is the second. So if the camera can pick that up or not, this is looking much brighter. Now that's coming on to multiple layers of that magenta over that white. It's getting really vibrant at the front edge there. There's all sorts of colour combinations you could do that with. Like I did on the board I showed you earlier, just play around with the different interactions that different colours have. If you search for the colour wheel on the internet, you can come up with all kinds of different ways colours interact with each other. I think what I'm going to do to finish it off is I'm going to use a little bit of purple ink and just darken a little bit of these magenta areas at the back there. So it's actually Game Ink Violet. I'm just going to add that to the magenta that we've already got. Again, you could stop where it is, but you can keep going and do all sorts of things. So I'll just concentrate on this back section here. I'm just going to darken it just a little bit. And you could use the purple to darken any area of the blue you want to be a bit darker as well as the magenta. And I think we'll call that one done for now. Unfortunately, I forgot to do the tail piece, but we'll have to come back with the magenta on that and do that later. So coming back to this one we did earlier, I'm just going to darken up certain areas of it with the purple ink, just to give a bit more of a transition. But I'm going to try not to hit the hexes at all. So it's mainly in this area here. I just think it wants to be a little bit darker to show off the curviness of these sort of rocket pods. So just going to feather that in there lightly. Maybe the back here. And anywhere else that you weren't happy with earlier, you can use the purple ink to knock the magenta back a bit. So along this spine, it needs to be a little bit darker. Okay, so didn't do a lot there, but I think that looks a bit better. So we're going to move on to the next colour now, which will be a yellow ink. So we're coming back to this aircraft here that we did the hex tumble on. Again, you could leave it here. You could have done just a solid colour with a stencil and left it, but we're going to play again with the colour transitions. We're going to use a yellow ink over this magenta, which is going to give us a vibrant red, but we're still going to have the magenta in some areas. So I'm going to be concentrating the ink from the back where the tumbles are going forwards. Now what we can do if we want to is we could darken up the front edge to just give a bit more of a transition, fading into the yellow, because at the minute it is very yellow along the front, so we can use a little bit of red ink to help knock that back and give more of a transition going on. I mean, as I said before, you can just leave things at any stage. If you think it looks cool as it is, then just leave it, but I'm just going to do a quick red ink as well. And I'm going to just add it to what I've got in the airbrush. I've tipped out some because there was a bit too much yellow in there. But it's just a little bit of red ink. So now in there we've got, let's get it on the camera, we have an orange. It looks quite a pale orange, but if I really build that up, this is actually quite a strong orange once it's built, because there's quite a bit of red in there. So we'll start by just doing this wing here. I'm just on this front leading edge where the hexes start. I'm just going to darken those a bit. So if you compare that side to that side, there's a difference there.
Yeah, much more vivid.
It's just knocking that yellow back just a touch right at the start of the hexes. There we go. And if you wanted to, you could come back in with the white. So like on this panel here, in this area, I've come back in with the white and then the magenta ink. So you could pick out some of these very magenta areas and bring them back up as well. There's all sorts of things you could do to keep going if you wanted to. But I think we'll call that one done.
Fantastic.
And let's just do a quick group shot of all the ones we've worked on today. So there we go.
It's a remarkable, terrific trio.
Thank you very much.
And a lot of really nice color transitions and forms within it as well, for very little effort comparatively speaking. You know,
yeah, I mean, the stencil's doing a lot of work for you, but again, just playing around with color theory. Do a bit of research on color theory on the internet. There's a thing called the color wheel, and it will show you what are called complementary colors, and what color makes what if you mix them. And because we're using the ink, it's going to give the mixing on the model.
Yeah.
And that's what's given us all these transitions here. Is we're doing mixing on the model with the transparent ink. If you're using paints, like a normal paint for doing this, it wouldn't work. You wouldn't get all the transitions that we've got going on there. So that's why for this, I mean, you could do it with that and you'd have a different effect.
Yeah.
You could just do a solid, you know, hexes or tumbles onto something and have a different way of doing it. But this is just a way of doing it, and I think it looks cool.
Yeah, no, 100%. It looks fantastic. So this is the first little batch of stencils that we'll be looking at over the next little while. Let us know what you think below, whether or not you've played around with any of the high-speed stencils before as well. These are definitely one to have a look at then to expand that range.
Yep, and these are all going to be a Kickstarter that's coming soon. If you're watching it when it's released, this video that is. Obviously, if we're a couple of years in the future, the Kickstarter's happened, you should have bought then. But yeah, so thanks for watching, guys. Hope it was enjoyable for you.
Go ahead and check out our other content on screen now. And while you're at it, why not hit subscribe and remember to ding our dong. Go on, you know you want to click it. Go on.